afternoon, everybody. We're thrilled that you were able to join us this afternoon. Before we get started, I'd like to start with a little bit of housekeeping about today's webinar. Number one is that we will be recording this so we can send it out to all the participants or all the attendees of today's webinar, as well as all of those that have registered that weren't able to join us today. We've already also received some questions that we'll address here throughout the entire webinar, but also at the end where we'll have plenty of time for a Q&A. And Chad and I will answer these questions throughout the entire webinar that we have going today. So we might stop and answer a few questions as we get them, and then we'll have, like I said, an opportunity at the end to talk about it a little bit more. But before we get started, I'd like to take an opportunity to introduce myself as well as my partner in crime here today. I'll pass it over to Chad first and let him introduce himself, and then we'll get started.
Perfect. Thanks, Steve. Yeah, so Chad Peters, Director of Infrastructure Solutions here at Service Express. And really what my role is with the organization is working with our customers and partners to unpack their data center, talk about trends in the industry, talk about longevity, reliability of their equipment, and really just focus on, helping customers, keep that equipment or upgrade that equipment as needed.
Great. Thanks, Chad. And my name is Steve Stewart. I am the Director of Sales Enablement at Service Express, and my team is primarily responsible for onboarding our new hires, but also working with our existing sellers and leaders, taking information like we're going to be talking about today and becoming advisors for our clients and our prospects out in the marketplace throughout the tenure of their stay with Service Express. So now that we've let you know a little bit about who we are, let's talk a little bit about why we're here in the first place here today. So what's the why behind the research and why we're doing this here today? Service Express is a third-party maintenance provider, and over the last several years, we've conducted several of these surveys and these infrastructure reports to understand what the trends are in the industry and what is happening in the marketplace. So really what we're trying to do is with these surveys and these infrastructure reports are capture the pulse of what's going on in the IT world, because it's very critical for planning, especially in today's environment with the pandemic and everything. We're thinking about helping customers think about their refresh strategies, their maintenance strategies, how to maximize their efficiencies within their data center. And what we're going to be talking about today is very specific to the healthcare industry. So we all know that the industries that we work in or the verticals that we work in all have nuances, but especially with healthcare, there are some very unique things that are going on in that market. And we'll address those and talk about those today. And then finally, what we want to do is we want to equip the healthcare IT professionals with data that they can actually use. So how can they make better decisions around efficiencies, maximizing their investments or the return on investment, and obtain economies of scale to make their data centers function more efficiently and more effectively. So when we talk today, who participated in this survey? Where did we get all this information? Like I was talking about earlier, we're focusing this today specifically on the healthcare market. So what we're going to be doing is talking about the statistically significant data that we've been able to pull from various departments or various companies within the healthcare market. We've been able to capture organizations of various sizes. So we've captured organizations, as you can see from this graph, with $1 billion plus in revenue, and then also all the way down to $250,000 up to $50 million. So what we wanted to do was give a broad understanding across the healthcare market of what trends and what things are impacting our healthcare providers and our healthcare companies that we're working with and dealing with. So before we dive into our conversation here today, we'd like to ask you a question. We'd like to do a quick little survey and a quick little poll to start to see how these information that we're going to get from you today, how that ties into the infrastructure report and how that information plays out. So if you might take a few seconds here and select the answer that you think is the top priority for you as a healthcare provider or a healthcare organization this year. We'll give you about 15 or 20 seconds to answer this. So as we're getting all the answers here, we'll take the data and we'll talk about it for just a moment, and then I'll pass it over to Chad to talk about how your results tie into the results that we found from our survey. So as we're looking at it, improving internal processes and reducing IT costs are the primary factors. In fact, everybody has answered in one of those two. So I think what you're going to find as we talk through this is that your results or your comments are going to tie very well into what we found from your peers across the industry. So with that being said, I'll pass it over to Chad to talk a little bit more about our results and our insights of our report and how your comments will tie into this.
Fantastic. Thanks, Steve. And yeah, where we want to start at is really kind of focus on what we uncovered through this survey as really top 3 priorities and top 3 challenges. And here you can see, I mean, and again, you're seeing a little bit of overlap from each side. I mean, strengthening security was certainly a top priority. And I think as we've talked with customers, certainly security has become a priority and remained a priority. And with the pandemic, a lot of people began to work from home. And what we saw in a lot of industry is all of a sudden people that were not remotely connecting to the data center to do work, all of a sudden started to connect to the data center to do work. And that rapidly kind of increased the need, urgency for security to kind of go to work on that, because all of a sudden you went from a small percentage of the workforce, working from home to maybe a larger percent. And all of a sudden you start to unpack a little bit of some security issues that might be popping up. So strengthening security was certainly one of the top 3 priorities that we uncovered in the survey. Another big priority, and again, this survey was taken right in the throes of certainly the COVID pandemic. And so a big thing that we uncovered here was developing the IT staff, right? The team members, and developing their capabilities. Because as we've all seen and all experienced, whether in our own companies or companies that we are consumers of, we've all experienced some level of, impact to staffing and talent. And so the healthcare industry was no different. And so a big priority is, how do I develop my IT team members, their capabilities, maybe even cross-train capabilities, to make sure that we're able to keep, growing and scaling in the business. And right along with that, and actually we saw this just from the survey we just took, was improving internal processes. How do I make things more efficient, more streamlined, to run faster, better, and easier, in our business? And so that was again one of the top 3 priorities that we uncovered as we connected with a variety of IT professionals in the healthcare space. Challenges, just like strengthening security is a priority, we have to do it. Guess what? Hard to do. So it became a big challenge as well. Probably the highest challenge that we saw was, how do we now go about implementing these security policies in our data center, in our infrastructure? Just like we noticed that a priority is developing IT team member capability, guess what? A challenge is also talent and workforce. We all experienced a lot of turnover, people going to different jobs throughout this time period. And so how do I retain top talent, and how do I train top talent was a big challenge that we are seeing. And then lastly, data privacy and compliance, which again overlaps a bit potentially as we talked to people a little bit with that kind of work from home, Internet of Things, bring your own device, all those things kind of became that. And also as people started to look at cloud solutions, now data privacy and compliance pop up as well. Okay, if I'm going to move this off-prem to a cloud solution, what has to happen? How do I regulate that? How do I secure that? How do I remain compliant? So those really became our top priorities and challenges that we saw as an outcome of interviewing a lot of the healthcare IT professionals. And as we kind of look ahead, we'll kind of unpack a little bit of the data center strategies. So while we talked about priorities and challenges, well, now what are the strategies that we're taking within the data center? And what you're seeing here is you're seeing kind of two views of this. One is the current strategy. What are we doing today? And then over the next 12 months, what do we anticipate to do? What do we think is going to happen? Where we'd like to go? And you can see it moves a little bit. I mean, we see a little bit of wiggle room here, but we're not talking about major dynamic shifts in the data center. We're talking about small movements where we see public cloud grow a little bit or hope to grow a little bit. We see colo maybe shrink a little bit, and then hosted private cloud again increase a little bit, and then on-prem still remains the predominant way that we're going to host and access data is with an on-prem solution. And we see that pretty consistently, across the board in healthcare. Some of that is due to what we already uncovered with compliancy and data privacy and security. If it's on-prem and it's in the data center, a lot more security can be put in place for that, or perceived security. And then there's regulations and rules if I'm going to have this equipment leave my data center. And so that kind of tracks to what we've already kind of seen as, again, as Steve mentioned, as providers of third-party maintenance. That certainly tracks with what we've witnessed and experienced within the data center performing maintenance. But we are seeing, again, a few little shifts here where we are starting to see some companies in healthcare start to enhance and increase their cloud presence and kind of look at, it's not necessarily a cloud first strategy, but what things can be safely moved to the cloud that maybe don't impact the security with our patients, but still create efficiencies in the data center. And so that's why we're seeing kind of small percentage bumps in regards to cloud and private cloud. And as we kind of think ahead to moving forward, one of the things we want to do is really kind of kick off another poll. We did a poll earlier, and Steve, I'll kind of have us launch into another poll if you wouldn't mind taking us through that.
Yeah, absolutely. And so, Chad, to your point, when you're talking about the migration or the shift from right now into the future about the on-prem data center, 51%, they're still going to maintain on-prem data centers. The question here is, when choosing a provider to help you with that on-prem data center, what's most important to you? And we'll take a few seconds here just to let everybody answer, and then we'll dive into the next piece of the content and see how your answers compare to what the research shows. Fantastic. So response to time issues is 100% for everybody. So when looking at all of these items, price and customer experience and ease of placing calls, response time to issues is important. That uptime, making sure that you have everything running and it's effective and it's not challenging you in those ways. So Chad, I'll let you kind of dive into the next pieces because I really see this as a really interesting piece.
Yeah, absolutely. So as a result of conducting this survey, what we really found when we think about aligning the maintenance decisions and the challenges, kind of putting those together, if we look at what those top three drivers that influence decision, what we found was number one was price. And we get it, right? I mean, we're all trying to adhere to budgets. We want to, really make sure we're maximizing our OpEx and CapEx budgets, no matter really kind of what industry we're in. So price plays a big factor in that, price for maintenance. But right behind that though, and this is where we have that balance that we're always trying to strive for, how do I get the best price for maintenance while maintaining a very good customer experience and at the same time getting a great response to issues and quick fixes and correct fixes. And so these three dynamics sometimes can kind of pull at each other a little bit when we're thinking about what are we trying to get in the data center. Up front it might be price, but long term it's like, okay, well, how do we ensure that our systems are going to be up, our users are going to have access, and our customers have great experiences, with that uptime and with those servers and services. And so, when we saw response time to issues being kind of the number one thing back in our prior survey, it certainly fell into our top three. And really, like I said, the perfect storm is how do you get these three kind of puzzle pieces to interlock well with one another, so you are getting a good value, and at the same time, you're getting that high level of customer experience and service and quick response to issues. So that is certainly the three factors that really drove all the team members that we engaged in their decisions. And guess what? The challenges are really about the same. So we want these things. These are the most important things, and these help us make our decisions. But they're also some of the biggest challenges that we have as well. We typically are paying a high cost for service. How do we bring that cost down? But if we bring that cost down, we don't want to have a risk of slow response, poor response, and we certainly don't want to have a risk of the engineer coming on site and not really having all the skills necessary to get us back up and running in our production environment. So these are really what we're seeing is kind of the dynamic in what drives us for a decision, and then what are we seeing as the biggest obstacles that are in our way. So those make up that. And then if we think about the data center itself, what we're thinking about the spend that we have, what are really the biggest cost saving measures that we're trying to put in place and implement the best efficiencies. And certainly what we're hearing within the data center is consolidation. How do we consolidate down servers? That might be virtualizing them. That might be potentially moving some things that maybe are more archival, maybe not as production as they once were. Maybe how do we go cloud with some of those services, right? Get them out of the data center. But how do we maximize the use of that data center, right? Every rack that we have, every server we have, that costs us. That costs us in maintenance spend. That costs us in power and cooling spend. So how do we now consolidate the data center down to maximize its efficiency? And at the same time, how do we leverage equipment for longer? And this is where we've seen customers begin to leverage different approaches. Like I mentioned with the data center consolidation, we might see customers begin to leverage more of a hybrid approach of we're going to virtualize some things, maybe we're going to go to cloud with some other things, and then maybe we'll be on-prem, but maybe some of the legacy things that maybe can't easily translate to cloud. Similar with extending the life of equipment. How do we take a piece of equipment that normally we would have refreshed at year 5? How do we now keep that equipment to year 7 or beyond? And so now customers are beginning to look at what are those other solutions that I can bring into the mix and create kind of a hybrid approach to maintenance. Maybe historically I went 100% OEM, and when my first 3 years of warranty were up, then I started to look at a refresh. Well, now I want to stretch my dollars a little bit. I don't want to lose out on service, right? We saw that in the previous slide. I don't want to lose out on experience and service, but how can I now stretch my dollars, stretch that equipment a little bit? It isn't being maxed out. It's still working well for the environment. And so now we're seeing customers take more of an approach of a little bit of hybrid. How do I now mix the OEM in with perhaps a third-party provider to really maximize that equipment life? And then how do I get insight from my provider, whoever they are, on really what should stay and what should go? And so we're starting to see and hear more from customers looking for more of the insight of tell me what I don't know. Tell me what this thing can actually do for me and how long I can expect to keep it. And then certainly kind of rounding out those top 3 is now how do I move from on-prem to cloud? What makes sense to go? What makes sense to stay? Sometimes you don't have a choice, right? Sometimes you have maybe a certain application or a certain platform that just isn't easily going to transfer to a cloud application, and you have to keep it on-prem. And so these are all things now that we're seeing, and as we've seen in the survey, we're seeing in the healthcare industry specifically, our IT professionals working on and battling with throughout the year. And some of this too, when we think about leveraging extended equipment life, some of this is a byproduct of availability. We are in a situation now, we're in a very unique situation globally where supply chains are heavily disrupted, regardless of what type of product you're trying to purchase. But certainly in the electronic data center space, we're seeing a big impact to supply chain and a lot of disruptions across various OEMs. So now it's not even so much as a matter of I want to maximize my spend and I don't want to spend now. It's I have the budget, but I can't spend because I can't get it here. And so that's also kind of forced that extended life concept as well. Is yeah, I think I might be due for a refresh, but I can't do that right now because what I want just isn't available to bring in yet. And so that's also become a catalyst, we believe, to what we're seeing, as you know, like I said, in this survey especially, what we're seeing and hearing from customers is I can't get it here. So there's, again, a few of the insights around the data center and what we're seeing in that regard. And Steve, I'll throw it back to kind of talk more about what we're hearing and seeing when we think about again, longer results of the pandemic.
Sure, and thanks, Chad. And you did answer one of the questions that had come through about the supply chain impacts. So thanks for being proactive on that one. But we've all seen what's happened over the last 2 to 2.5 years with the pandemic, right? Before the pandemic, it was very rare that there were a lot of hybrid approaches to a workforce. Most people were in the office and were there every single day. And then the pandemic comes along, and then all of a sudden we all have to pivot really, really quickly and send people home. And how are we going to support all those people as they're in home offices or they're migrating to those home offices? How did we have to set them up? How did we have to support them? Security became an even bigger issue, right? Because we had to make sure that if they're accessing it from their home, do we have the same ability to be able to protect all of our information? And then now we're coming out of the pandemic and we're starting to see some real changes where it probably will never go back to a full-time workforce. There are hybrids that are happening now. So we have to be very flexible because that is becoming the norm now. Because of the great resignation a few years ago, people now have expectations of that work-life balance, and being able to work remotely and still be able to work at the office a few days a week is almost a given. If they're being told that they have to be in an office or in an office space 100% of the time, and there are other companies that are offering a hybrid approach or a remote approach, now all of a sudden we're at a disadvantage in the way in which we can maintain our workforce. So we have to be very, very flexible in the way in which we're approaching it. So as you can see right now, the current IT team workspace is really about full-time in the office about 44%, but you see full-time remotely at 30%. And then you see over the next 12 months that full-time will probably inch up a little bit, but still only 50% of the time are they going to be required to be in the office. And they're still going to have that time to be able to work from home or do that flex schedule where they can work a few days in the office and a few days at home. So that's really creating some real struggles with IT departments to say, how do we support them? How do we get them the stuff that they need in their home offices? And how do we protect all the information that we have and how can they access it? So it is a real kind of a quandary for organizations to say, what are the processes or what are the protocols that they're going to have in place to ensure the fact that they have a workforce that's fully efficient and effective, but at the same time being able to avoid that turnover and keep those employees that they want to keep.
Yeah, Stephen, I think this really ties back to a couple of some of the results we saw earlier with talent, with IT team member capability, with security. I mean, I think we're really kind of seeing this here reflecting, some of those other survey results of saying, yeah, security is very important. Yeah, you know what? A big reason is we're still going to have a lot of team members that are going to be working from home and accessing those resources remotely. And same thing as you mentioned already with talent. People leaving organizations that are able to maybe fill their need with some of the hybrid schedule. Well, how do we now keep and retain those team members? So I think that really kind of ties other aspects of our results together here.
Absolutely. So, Chad, as you were talking, there were some questions that were coming in, and we also had some people who had submitted questions when they registered for the event here today. But one of the questions was, what's the best-in-class storage provider and servers and networking that you might recommend?
Sure. Well, one thing I'd like to say is we're somewhat vendor agnostic in our world. So one of the things I would say is rather than telling you who might be the best or the worst, what I'd like to tell you is what we see from an install base. When we're out there servicing customers, what are we most likely to see in those different spaces? Certainly in the storage arena, what we continue to see most often from an install base report would really be EMC. Dell EMC still has a very strong foothold in the storage side. A big reason for that is the portfolio they bring to the table. They have such a wide portfolio, catering to a lot of different business needs, and so we still see that very strong. In the networking space, Cisco certainly still has a great foothold, but we are seeing other companies begin to kind of run ahead a little bit for different reasons. We've seen Juniper grow, certainly in our footprint, and then we're starting to see this, again, other players come up, but still Cisco has the predominant larger space out there in the networking side. Server side, it is still kind of a neck and neck run on the Intel server space side between HPE and their ProLiant and now their Synergy platform and Dell PowerEdge. I mean, those still hold really high quantities out there in the data center. And then from there, you see a variety of Intel players. Supermicro certainly is in there as well. Cisco UCS is also a player. And then from there, it kind of splits a little bit as you get to the mid-range server side. IBM in the mid-range space is probably the bigger player. Certainly, we see that more often in healthcare, where we see IBM having a stronger foothold in a lot of healthcare data centers.
Great. Another question that just came through was around budgeting that's happened. Like, how has the pandemic impacted budgeting, and specifically around CapEx, capital expenditure, and operating expenditure? And I can tackle that one a little bit, where during the pandemic, a lot of things, especially the supply chain, kind of dried up a little bit, right? And it took longer to get the equipment that people were looking to refresh. But at the same time, budgets were being cut because profits were being cut. And when profits are cut, our capital expenditures are cut as well. So what we saw was a migration from CapEx to OpEx, extending the life of pieces of equipment so they could keep that going. And then until their capital expenditures freed up, they'd be able to go back and start to do their refreshes. We're starting to see that right now, but still, like Chad talked about with the supply chain, is that there's still some long lag times to get that equipment. So companies migrated towards operating expenditure. Now they're migrating back a little bit towards those capital expenditures. So when it does free up, they're going to be able to do those refreshes. But in the meantime, being able to maintain that equipment for longer periods of time is a real priority for them.
Yeah, and I'd say too, kind of along those same lines of the CapEx spend, what we're seeing too is where certainly there's some availability issue, availability issues. There's just lead time, right? I mean, some cases where your lead time may have historically been a couple of weeks to get an order processed and sent to you, that now might be a few months or longer. And so what we're seeing is people trying to really kind of read the crystal ball a little bit better and order ahead, hoping that when they need it, it will be able to arrive.
So as we're wrapping up our time here, we have just a couple of minutes left. I want to talk to you about some additional resources that we'll provide for you. For everybody that registered for the webinar this afternoon, we're going to be sending you the healthcare industry report, as well as our the Service Express 2022 data center and infrastructure report. So the data that we went through and the research that Chad had talked about, this is only a tip of the iceberg. We get a lot deeper into some more information and some more details that you'll find interesting that will support what Chad was talking to you about. So everybody will be receiving that in the next day or so as we walk away from the webinar. We're at 1 minute to go here, and the last question, Chad, that maybe I'll ask you is, and this one came in as well, and I've got to look at it here. It says, how has rack cooling changed with the increase in virtual technology?
Yeah, so I would say what's happened there is we've gotten more dense, and this kind of goes back to data center consolidation we talked about in a few slides earlier about some of the results we saw there. What you're seeing now is you're seeing compute just get more dense and things get more dense in the rack. And so what that's kind of created is higher power usage, higher heat generation. And so a lot of data centers have had to get innovative in how they cool. Some of the traditional air-cooled models, that we've done in the past, maybe not be working as well as they once did. And so now you're seeing, things with, more implementation of certainly hot cold aisles. You're also seeing liquid cooled come into play a little bit more. You're also seeing kind of, a term that really is kind of called RDX come into play now, which is kind of like a rear door heat exchanger that gets put into cabinets now. So there's been just some innovations along the way with cooling, because we are seeing just those racks get more and more densely populated, and even the equipment, inside those racks, right? More of the components, the CPU, the memory, getting more packed inside those servers. And certainly as we virtualize, now we're doing more VMs and compute in there. And so, yeah, we've had to get a little creative in how we cool moving forward.
Okay, thanks, Chad. So thank you for joining us today. We're at the end of our time. We appreciate you taking the time out of your schedule here today to talk to us about the insights of the infrastructure report. If you have questions or would like to talk, please call this 800 number or connect with us at serviceexpress.com. Thanks so much for your time, and we'll look forward to talking to you next time.
All right, thanks everyone.